Hello and welcome to our recorded session where we will be talking about clean label or buzzword marketing. So we are going to be talking about what claims really require and how you will formulate them. I am so excited to introduce Jonathan Deutsch from Drexel Food Lab and Lauren Swann from Food Facts Work. I would love for both of you guys to just introduce yourselves, give a quick background, and then we'll jump right into the content.
Sure. I'm John Deutsch. I'm a professor of culinary arts and science at Drexel University in Philadelphia, and I'm the founding director of the Drexel Food Lab. We're a food product development and culinary innovation lab. We work closely with many SFA members, and one of the most common requests we get is, I want help with my product, but it has to be clean label. We're not even sure all the time what that means. And members aren't always sure what that means. So I'm really excited about the opportunity today to sort of unpack that very common um, phrase.
I'm Lauren Swann, and I'm a registered dietitian and nutrition, specializing in marketing communications on the technical end of it, heavily into food labeling regulations compliance. And I've worked with many different kinds of food companies all over the world under FDA and USDA FSIS. And I've seen food labeling evolve, the landscape of it over many years, and I've never grown tired of it. So I'm very happy to be here today with the clean label or buzzword marketing, what claims require and how to formulate for them, which Jonathan will be discussing. And clean label claims, they've been buzzing around now for about the past 20 years because I did a Google Trends search on it and I saw the spike in it. But what does it really mean? Because you actually don't even put the phrase clean label on a label. So consumer perception is very important. And we've got lots of social media influencers out there today talking all kinds of things about what foods are good for you and what aren't. And it can affect online sales, but it can also create compliance risks. FDA warning letters if things are not properly labeled. USDA FSIS can prevent shipment from a plant. You can get lawsuits from competitors, and you can get complaints from consumer advocacy groups. You can also get complaints that just go viral online in social media or through blogs. So it's really an important time to make sure that we're labeling things in compliance and we recognize how what we label influences consumer perception. It's important too to recognize that there's mandated label disclosure and there are optional claims, and both of those can influence clean label. One of the top ones that we see are allergen mandates, which is kind of interesting because a food can have a big 8 or big 9 allergen and still be clean labeled. But because if you're, if you're purchasing or preparing food for somebody in the household, or you're running a food service area or Head Start daycare center or something, allergen labeling can be really important. Another one is nutrition facts, which is also kind of interesting to me because uh, highly nutritious food can also have a lot of additives in it or be highly processed. But there are aspects of the nutrition facts label that are perceived. And I think that that really has to do with sort of like a healthy label, kind of something about healthy label relates to clean label. So the nutrition facts label sort of factors into that too. The product name can affect our perception of clean label. And of course, the ingredient list, which is where we see additives listed. Now, that's not quite the same as optional claims, and these two can sometimes get conflated. And the reason that I make this distinction is, for example, the claim, no GMO, is an optional claim, and that claim can be delivered through a third party certification, which of course is optional and you have to pay for, and then it's subject to those requirements. But that's not the same as the GMO disclosure requirement, under USDA Agricultural Marketing Service. And that disclosure requirement does not address absence of claims. FDA has an absence of, it's called bioengineered ingredients, and they have a guidance document, but the claim itself, the absence of claim for GMO, is not officially defined anywhere. It's regulated under the aspect of everything on your label has to be truthful and non-misleading. So optional claims sometimes blur the lines with what's required and what isn't, but we have ingredient quality sourcing origin claims or absence of claims. And those are optional regarding the ingredients in the product. And then we have nutritional or functional health benefit claims. So when we get into minimal requirements for allergen mandates, one of the most important things to remember is number one, required allergen disclosure can be done two ways. Now, the most common way is the contains statement that immediately follows the ingredient list. And it's important to remember that's a mandated disclosure. So that statement, that contains statement, there's nothing else that should be in there but what the product contains if it is one of the big 9 allergens. So you really shouldn't have words in there like gluten or contains flounder or contains cashews, but gluten-free. Okay, so the contain statement is only the mandated allergen statement, and there have been FDA warning letters on this. So this is really important because I've seen this when I review labels. They'll start using the contain statement to talk about gluten-free, and that's not where it belongs. The contain statement immediately follows the ingredient list, and that's all it should have in there is either a big 9 allergen specific, not the word tree nuts, has to be cashews, pistachios, whatever. It's a specific type of fish. That actually does not include shellfish, but many companies do it, and FDA has no, it doesn't include, mollusks. It includes crustacean shellfish like shrimp, but not molluscan shellfish like clams, oysters, and so forth. So the point is, there are specific requirements for the allergen contained statement. It might be perceived by consumers as part of clean labeling, but it's a required disclosure, and there are very specific mandates about it. It is not in the regulations. It's legislation that got passed without being written in the regulations, but there are a lot of guidance states at the FDA website that very clearly distinguish what needs to be labeled there and what doesn't. And USDA FSIS is actually not subject to the Allergen Protection Act. That only applied to FDA, but they do, to be consistent, they do allow the allergen labeling. The next area that's a requirement, the nutrition facts panel, that's required nutrients, but sometimes there are clean label claims that relate to nutrients that are not required. So not required to be disclosed. So if that happens, they have to be disclosed. Now, with the required nutrients, one of the nutrients that is, I believe, sort of under fire with the clean label movement is added sugar. And it also, I think, in the ingredient list, it relates to it with isolated starches, with extracted isolated starches and carbohydrates. But again, that's just required disclosure. So the nutrition facts label is sometimes perceived as having information that relates back to clean label. The product name, specifically flavor labeling, that relates back to clean labeling because sometimes you have to declare an artificial flavor. So another area that it could relate to clean labeling is sometimes products have to are required to include the word imitation. Most foods today aren't doing that, but there was once a product called imitation mayonnaise. And I think when bacon bits first came out, I don't think there was real bacon in them and they were required. But you don't see many imitation products on the market today. You may see products where the product name is not exactly what you might expect based on the ingredient. For example, I had to do labeling for a pizza product that had to meet school meal regulations. So The actual name of the ingredient was pepperoni seasoned turkey sausage, even though it looks like pepperoni, but it doesn't meet the standard for it. So sometimes that happens too with product names. Pepperoni seasoned turkey sausage doesn't sound that bad, but sometimes a product name reveals things about the product that consumers either aren't expecting or don't think, should be in that product. And then, of course, the ingredient list with additives. That's a big issue. Chemical sounding words, which aren't necessarily bad for us, and sometimes they're naturally sourced, like citric acid can be produced by enzymolysis, the way I understand it. And so additives can be very tricky to deal with in clean labeling because another example I have, there can be two different ways you can name the same ingredient, and that's often available in the regulations. So many years ago, when I worked on the first fat-free ice creams under the Seal Test brand, the replacer was sodium carboxymethylcellulose, but we were allowed to call it modified cellulose gum. Now, that's just one example, and neither one of them sound all that great for a clean label. But the point is, sometimes there is latitude for ingredient names. The other thing about an ingredient list is you can get into functional labeling. Some ingredients are required to declare their function. Preservatives must declare their function. And that's interesting because ascorbic acid can also be used as a preservative. So when it's used as a preservative, it must be declared that way. But when it's added as a nutrient, it's just whatever, sodium ascorbate or whatever the form is that it's added in. But other additives that have a functional purpose, the functional purpose can be declared within the ingredient list. The only other one where it's required besides preservatives are colors. And we'll get into that because we know that's a big thing right now with additives and color additives. But the additives portion of the ingredient list is something that can give the impression of being ultra processed when in fact the addition of those additives could be something that makes the food safer or appear in a way that consumers expect or affect the body of the product so that it's not all a sloppy spill out if it's supposed to be firm, even though it's edible and won't hurt you. So that is another option with additives in the ingredient list. Okay, so when we get into optional claims, we get into ingredient quality, sourcing, or origin claims such as natural, pure, raw, wild, 100%, or absent of claims like no artificial or gluten-free. And again, it's important to remember that these claims are optional. They're not all defined. Natural is the biggest one that's been aggravating the industry ever since I've worked in food rate labeling because FDA won't define it. USDA FSIS does have a definition, but they also have a whole pre-approval process. So natural is one to be cautious about. And one of the ways to be cautious about natural is take a look at some of the lawsuits going on at the time. That will give you a feel for what is creating risk in the absence of an FDA definition. Claims like pure, raw, and wild became more common when natural ended up in courts in lawsuits because there was a shift. And again, because there are no definitions per se, there is a definition for pure honey in the state of Florida. There is a definition for wild for salmon or blueberries or rice, and they're not all exactly the same. When it comes to herbs, there's a difference between a cultivar and what might have been foraged, naturally foraged. So the point is, sometimes when there's a shift from one word to another, that word becomes under scrutiny. And besides wild, two of these that did were pure and 100%. But interestingly enough, not necessarily because of the formulation, because of forever chemicals leaching from food grade packaging into the product. And then a competitor analyzes the product and comes back and says, this is not 100% or pure. So that's something else to think of with these kinds of claims. They might not necessarily be specifically defined for any food product or every food product, but there are other considerations to take into other factors to take into consideration about how they're used. And then we have absence of claims like nothing artificial or gluten-free. Gluten-free does have a definition. No artificial looks pretty straightforward, but can sometimes get a little dicey about what is or is not natural. And then again, with the colors, which I'll be going through with the next slide. Then we get into nutrition, functional, or health benefit claims. Nutrient content claims are clearly defined in the regulations, what you can and cannot say, and that's it. You can use words like contains, provides, good source of, or rich. Those are all defined in the regulations. You can't use terms outside of what's in the regulations, and you can only use them for nutrients that have been defined. For example, a low carb claim is out of compliance. Carbohydrate claims have never been defined by FDA, so they're not supposed to be used. And yes, there is abuse, but there's no definition for low carb. There's definitions for low fat. There's definitions for high protein and high fiber, but there's no definition for carb. So they're clearly spelled out. And again, it's the no added sugar and no sugar added that tends to be feeding into the clean label claims, at least from what I can tell. Structure function claims relate an ingredient component or nutrient to an established routine bodily function. They cannot be used to describe abnormal health states or diseases. So a structure function claim is something like calcium builds strong bones. I don't really know that these feed so much into clean labeling, but again, clean labeling has the aura of healthful labeling. So that could be one way that they do. And then health or disease prevention claims, similar to nutrient content claims, can only be used if they're defined. And the defined ones do include things like eating lots of fruits and vegetables help lower your risk for cancer and things of that nature. And again, that's under that healthy umbrella. So the emerging regulations, FDA is working on an ultra-processed definition, and there was an RFI, and there were comments. We're not really sure how it's going to proceed. Under this administration, things appear to proceed differently. So we're not really sure how it's going to, as in those of us in the regulatory community, taking a look at the news that we've seen more recently. Color Additives did have an announcement, which usually goes through formal rulemaking, but however, it's been announced that color additives no longer need to be declared as artificial color if they are naturally sourced. And the one thing to remember about this is the reason that FDA initially got so strict on color additives, there was a time colors were added to food to mask and disguise spoiled or contaminated food. And that's why it became so important to distinguish if a color was added. And it did not matter if the color came from a natural source or a synthetic source, because the way it's seen is the color of the food is what results when you put all the other ingredients in. If you are adding an ingredient that does nothing but change the color, it is artificially coloring the product. Now, that ingredient can be a color of natural origin. So if you had a gallon of lemonade that was just lemon juice, water, and sugar, and you add a drop of beet juice, the beet juice isn't adding any flavor to the end product, but it is changing the color. And that's why, even though it's a color of natural origin, it's artificially coloring the product. That's where we were up until recently, and this has been relaxed. So a no artificial color claim is now permitted on products that include colors of natural origin. To the best of my knowledge, they still need to be identified as color in the ingredient list, but we're all kind of watching this one to see. Right now, the regulation states something different, so we don't really know how this is going to be documented in a way that we can apply it. And then there's front of pack is coming up too. And there it was recently, I think there was some movement recently on the front of pack proposal that was done. So we're just all watching to see the progress of these. The dietary guidelines and new pyramid speak more to healthful eating from a food component standpoint. They can also influence clean labeling. So that's it for clean labeling. I'm going to turn it over to Jonathan.
Great. Thanks, Lauren. That was a great overview, and I think it tees up the next part of the conversation really nicely. We're going to talk about some of the practicalities when we're asked to make a clean label product. It sounds good. Certainly, no one's saying, I wish my product had a dirtier label. How do I do that? But what they do say in different words is, I want it to have a long shelf life. I want it to be antimicrobial and very stable and food safe. My retailer requires 60 days or 90 days or 1 year. And often the solutions to those things is an additive that could be considered dirty. So that's where the challenge comes in. So it sounds great to do clean label, but it's complicated. So from a product development perspective, every time you make something clean label, you have to think about not only the ingredient selection, but also the processing, what's going to happen to your shelf life, what's going to happen to your risk management, the cost, because clean label can also be more expensive. And then thinking about the design constraint. If it has to be clean label, not everything is possible, right? You have to ask yourself, well, if I love this, delicious packaged snack cake that's always moist and tastes fresh, what are they doing to make that possible? And am I willing to do the same thing, right? So a lot of people will say, oh yeah, I want a healthy version of this product already on the market and a clean label version of this product already on the market, but it's not always possible. And I'll give you some examples. When you start, we get a lot of requests from folks who just say, I would like a clean label product, or I would like a clean label additive. And you really have to think strategically about what is the point? What are you trying to accomplish here? There are a lot of clean label techniques you could use in processing that already are pretty clean. So a great example is thermal processing, canning, retort. And if you think about it critically for a minute, it's just kind of mind-boggling, right? You buy a piece of tuna at the fish store, and 2 or 3 days later, it starts to get iffy in terms of whether it's safe to eat in your refrigerator, might get slimy, might get stinky. You can have a can of tuna with a really clean label, right? Tuna, salt, and water, or tuna, salt, and oil. And because of thermal processing, cooking that under pressure, which raises the temperature to 250 degrees Fahrenheit, you can make sure that everything is pretty much sterile inside that can, right? So that's an example of using processing in a way to obviate the need for additives, right? Another example is, can you distribute frozen? I'll give you a real case study. We had a vegan brownie maker come to us who made the most delicious vegan brownies I've ever had when they're freshly baked. But after about 3 or 4 days, they would turn into hockey pucks. And retailers were complaining that, these are great when I tried them, but you told me I'd have a 30-day shelf life, and they really don't even make it a week until customers start complaining. So they said, well, we want to stay clean label, but we need something to do to extend the shelf life. And there's really not an easy way to keep the nutrition the same, to keep the clean label attributes and make something like that last for 30 days. So what they did to solve this, and we helped them think through this, was they really changed their distribution. So what they're doing now is distributing this frozen, and then the retailer slacks the product puts it literally frozen on the shelf in the evening, and then the next day it's really high quality, and they only take enough out of the freezer that they need to take out for that. So that's a great example of the cleanest label possible, which is we're not adding anything. We're just rethinking the distribution to make it work for that product. Um, Refrigeration is another good method. If you feel like you can't get something clean label in a shelf stable way, maybe it could be distributed refrigerated, or maybe you could do direct to consumer or direct store distribution so that things aren't sitting around in warehouses or need as far along a date code. So really think, are you solving the problem or the symptom to start? As I said before, when you go from what's a so-called dirty label to clean label, you have to make some compromises. And of course, no one wants a label that's dirty, but what we do want are things like shelf stability, extended shelf life, predictable performance, cost effectiveness, and those are often at the expense of the cleanliness of the label. So to do that, you sometimes need long ingredient lists, chemical sounding names, synthetic preservatives, artificial colors or flavors, or refined ingredients. So if you want to go to clean label, which we certainly encourage, you just need to think through all the ramifications. Can you still get the preservation you need, the shelf life? Can you budget for this? And can you supply these ingredients as you need them? So just some specific examples. One claim that Lauren mentioned is no artificial preservatives. There are a bunch of preservatives like these that folks don't want to see on the label. And there are clean label alternatives to many of these. For example, there are natural antioxidants such as rosemary extract, tocopherols, citric acid, and green tea extract can be antioxidant. But there's a trade-off for those. They often require higher usage levels. They can impart flavor, and they may not have the stability of some of the dirtier label additives. So you just have to think through, I'm not discouraging the use of it, but just think through, can it be done with a more natural solution? Similarly, lots of folks look for more natural antimicrobials. Those exist. There are things like fermented sugar and vinegar blends, cultured dextrose, niacin, essential oils. But those often need to be used in conjunction with other changes. So, such as a lower pH, reduced water activity, modified atmosphere packaging or MAP, or high pressure pasteurization, HPP. And so the microbial works together with some other processing changes in order to get that to work. So it's not as easy as just saying, let's take out chemical A and replace it with clean label alternative B. Clean label alternative B also needs to be coupled with other changes to your formula that hopefully don't impact the flavor. As we were talking about with natural, natural typically means there's no artificial colors or artificial flavors. And there are natural replacements. So for example, you can use beet juice as a colorant, as Lauren mentioned. You can use turmeric extract. But again, you have to remember that you're compromising. So you're going to have less heat stability. You're going to have pH sensitivity, light sensitivity, and you're going to start to lose the color over time. So your bright reds and bright yellows might turn to brown. It's not a safety concern, but it might shorten your shelf life from a quality perspective. Sugar reduction is another area where folks are looking for natural solutions. They don't want to use an artificial sweetener, and those sweeteners do exist, but they can be challenging from a flavor standpoint and from a stability standpoint. You also have to remember with sugar that sugar does a lot of things in terms of bulking and moisture retention. It's not just the sweetness. And you've seen those with some sort of failed products that are very sweet, but not necessarily good quality in other ways. Another area is fat modification. So you can use some structured emulsions, carbohydrate-based emulsions, using different oils to replace saturated fats or trans fats. And those can maintain texture stability, but again, you have to think through the whole product. So it may impact water binding, the stability of the emulsions, microbial growth, and the sensory. So in short, clean label is great for marketing, but it's not easy. You have to think through your reformulation, your process redesign, your shelf life validation, your sensory optimization, and then where Lauren comes in and is key, the regulatory verification. And all of those have to work together. And we at the Drexel Food Lab love to help people think through these challenges. And we're also very honest when it's not possible. Every so often someone says, I love making pesto from my garden. It's the most delicious thing in the world. But when I buy the grocery store pesto from the center of store, it just doesn't taste the same. And there's a good reason for that. It's just not possible to make it taste the same in a shelf-stable way. Brands have gotten closer and closer, but it's just not there yet. So you have to compromise. Are you going to have a frozen version, a refrigerated version, a not quite as good version, or are you going to just say, you know what, I'm not going to go to market with something that isn't lights out perfect, and I'm just going to not pursue this project? And all of those are viable options, and we'll help you talk through them, but people need to do that legwork. So the key word to all of this on clean label is compromise. I always give the example that the most clean label food I can think of is a potato I grow in my backyard, right? It's shelf stable, it's local, it comes in its own packaging, it's healthy, it does all of that, right? But people don't want that potato. People want chips and fries and instant potatoes and scallop potatoes and all these cool innovations. And every time you add value to a product, you have to work through all of the stability, all of the cost, and all of the labeling requirements that go with that. So brands have to balance consumer demand for natural products with the need for effective presentation and being transparent and really thinking about what the consumer wants, what are the non-negotiables, what are the nice to haves, and so on are the key. So we would love to stay in touch. I know I'm speaking for Lauren as well. If you're interested in any formulation assistance to develop a clean label project, feel free to reach out to me or via Instagram to Drexel Food Lab. And Lauren is a phenomenal resource who we refer lots of our clients to for formulation work, labeling, and compliance work.